Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections. In the analysis part, we'll first have a comprehensive discussion with respect to the status of India's startup ecosystem, the challenges being faced by it, and the way forward for a booming startup ecosystem in the country. Then, in the second article, on the occasion of World Health Day, we'll have a look at the status of healthcare setup in the country and the measures needed to enhance it. Then, in the simplified section, we'll have a look at 5 different articles with a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2025 along with the validation. So stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of the day, this is with respect to Biryani and betting apps, innovation in Indian startups. From 2013 and 14, what we witnessed was that the inception of Indian startups. And with time, India became one of the most vibrant places for these startups around the world. And as of now, it is the 3rd largest startup ecosystem in the world after US and China. However, in a recent initiative, what was the Startup Mahakumbh, the Union Minister for Commerce and Industry has sparked a debate. What he said was that the Indian startup ecosystem is skewed towards low technology areas. It is skewed towards the domestic market. What he was actually trying to say was that he was making a comparison of Indian startup ecosystem with that of the Chinese startup ecosystem. He said the Chinese startup ecosystem is focused upon emerging technologies, deep technologies, for example, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Now, this has sparked a debate, and many of the founders of startup, for example, we have Aditya Palecha of Zepto, who has said that his company Zepto has contributed to more than 1,000 crores as tax revenues to the government and has helped create more than 150,000 source of employment. Now, again, what we'll try to do today is we'll look at the startup ecosystem. We'll have a comparative analysis with respect to the Chinese startup ecosystem. We'll see what are the issues plaguing the Indian startup ecosystem and what can be the way forward, right? So this is a very important topic and a probable question in the mains can be there. Now, this is a part of GS3, Indian economy and issues relating to planning, mobilization of sources and development and employment. Now, let's first discuss what do we mean by a startup. Now, see, we have Ministry of Commerce, and in the Ministry of Commerce, we have a particular department, which is Department for Promotion of Internal Trade and Industry, right? Now, this particular department, it recognizes some of the companies as startups based on certain parameters. What are those parameters? Now, if a company age, the period of existence and the operations should not exceed 10 years from the date of incorporation. Company type, incorporated as a private limited company, a registered partnership firm or a limited liability partnership. Annual turnover should have an annual turnover not exceeding 100 crores for any of the financial years since incorporation. Original entity, that is an entity, should not have been formed by splitting up or reconstructing an already existing business. Innovative and scalable. This is a very important point. Should work towards development or improvement of a product, process, service, and or have a scalable business model with high potential for the creation of wealth and employment. If a particular company actually fulfills these criteria, then the DPIIT can basically recognize that particular company as a startup. Now, if I were to have the status of the Indian startup ecosystem, total DPIIT recognized startups are almost 1,17,000 plus as of April 2024. Jobs created by these startups, it tunes to almost 13.2 lakh plus, according to the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. India's global rank in startup ecosystem, it's 3rd after US and China. Startup unicorns, that is those startups who have valuation more than $1 billion, 111 as of 2024. Total funding raised between 2021 and 23, more than 85 billion US dollars. Top cities for startups, Bengaluru, Delhi NCR, Mumbai, Hyderabad, Chennai, Pune. Now, this is the general description of the startup ecosystem in the country. Now, if I were to look at the sector-wise trends, where are these startups are actually situated, in which sectors? So we have e-commerce and quick commerce. You must be knowing about Amazon or Flipkart, what we call as the e-commerce apps. Or we have quick commerce in the form of Zepto or Big Basket, right? Then we have food delivery and services. Take, for example, we have Swiggy, or Zomato, right? Then we have SaaS, that is software as a service. Now, what is software as a service? See, sometimes if I were to use an application, I have to install that particular application. But these days, what we are having is, we have some of the companies providing that software on the internet itself. Let's take the example of Zoom, or let's take the example of Netflix. So that is software as a service. Then we have deep tech, including the space exploration. So we have some of these startups in the country, for example, Agnikul Cosmos in the space exploration, right? Next, we have healthcare and medical technology. For example, you must have heard about Practo, or you must have heard about Farm Easy. Now, these were the particular apps which were primarily used. They gained attraction, they gained importance during the COVID times, right? And again, understand, be it the e-commerce or the quick commerce, be it the food delivery, what they try to exploit is the urban middle class. Because as the disposable incomes of people are increasing, these apps are gaining traction. Next, we have fintech and digital payments. Let's take the example of Zerodha, or let's take the example of Paytm or Razorpay, right? So these are some of the examples. Then we have agri-tech. Now, some of these startups in the agri-tech domain are, for example, let's say we have AgroStar, or we have DHeart. Now, DHeart is actually working in almost 11 states, right? Next, we have betting, fantasy, sports, and gaming. Very famous these days, right? So we have different Bollywood stars actually advertising these betting apps, right? So we have Dream 11, or we have MPL, right? So these are the sectoral areas. Now, according to the DPIIT itself, in 2016, we just had the number of startups recognized by the DPIIT was just 500. And as of now, it's more than 1.59 as of January 2025. Industries leading for job creation in the startups, we have IT services, healthcare and life sciences, we have professional and commercial services, and then we have education, right? So do remember, these data can be important. Now, what have been the various programs to promote the startups in the country? The very first is Startup India Action Plan. Now, this Startup India Action Plan, this was basically conceptualized in the year 2016. And as a set of this program, we had 19 action plans, so as to give an impetus to the overall startup ecosystem in the country. So 19 action plans were a part of this Startup India Action Plan. Then we have Startup India Seed Fund Scheme. Now, what is the very objective of Seed Fund? We have some of the early enterprises, right? Early startups. So as to provide them the adequate funding, we have these seed funds. Next, we have Fund of Funds for Startups. This scheme is primarily being operationalized through SIDBI, right? So SIDBI has been given a corpus of money, and that fund is used for the startups. Next aspect is Credit Guarantee Scheme for Startups. Let's say we have a particular DPIIT recognized startup, and that has taken a loan, right? Now, if it defaults, then there has to be a credit guarantee with respect to the bank. So therefore, we have this particular scheme, which is Credit Guarantee Scheme for Startups. Next, we have self-certification. So for almost 10 labor laws and 3 environment laws, these startups can self-certify themselves, right? So there is no need for the government agencies to certify them. They can do the self-certification. So it actually reduces the compliance burden. Then we have faster exit for the startups. What it means is that these startups are actually notified by the government, and what the government does is that they have a very quick process for the faster exit. Now, this is something which really reduces the burden on the startups and make the whole ecosystem very efficient. Next, we have Startup India Hub. Now, again, the very objective of this online platform, which is Startup India Hub, is to basically integrate different stakeholders, be it the entrepreneurs, be it the innovators, be it the accelerators, be it the incubators, right? Or be it the funding agencies. So all these stakeholders can come on board, sit together, and then they can deliberate. That is what the objective of Startup India Hub is all about. Then we have National Startup Advisory Council. It's a very powerful body which is basically mandated to advise the government with respect to making the startup ecosystem more booming in the country, more productive in the country, right? Next, we have the SN scheme and the National Mentorship Portal. The SN scheme is primarily, it's focused upon the 8 northeastern states of the country and trying to augment the entrepreneurship capacity in that particular area, right? Then we have National Mentorship Portal. This is primarily aimed to make sure that we have those persons who have basically achieved good status in the startup ecosystem. They can act as the mentors to different small startups, right? So these are some of the very important programs initiated by the government. Now, So here we come at the most important aspect of today's discussion. So we have the Union Minister for Commerce and Industry. Now he basically made a comparison between the Indian startup ecosystem with that of the Chinese startup ecosystem. Now many of the people are finding it bitter. In fact, many of the founders of startups in the country, they're not really happy with the comments made by the Commerce Minister. But again, you have to consider this because these are the points which actually differentiate between the potential of Indian startups with that of the Chinese startups. Or what are the areas where the Indian startup ecosystem is lacking? What are the loopholes? What are the factors which are plaguing the Indian startup ecosystem? So what he said was that what the India startup are doing, food delivery apps, turning the unemployed youths into cheap labor so the rich can get their meals without moving. On the other hand, we have the Chinese startup ecosystem, which is focusing upon the electric vehicles and battery technology, dominating the global markets, vehicle production with companies like BYD. Then we have fancy ice cream and cookies, marketed as healthy, while everyone knows that this is not healthy. Now, on the other hand, we have Chinese startup firms focusing upon the semiconductors and artificial intelligence, investing heavily in self-reliance, building chips, what we call as the semiconductor chips, and AI models for the future. Instant grocery delivery. So India, what we are witnessing is the booming application of these instant grocery apps, right? Making people impatient and lazy while wasting resources on hyper-fast logistics. On the other hand, the Chinese firms are focusing upon robotics and automation, creating next-generation factories that produce more efficiently than anywhere in the world. Then we have the Indian startup ecosystems, and we know that whenever we turn on the YouTube, these days, what we are finding is that particular advertisement, right, which is focusing upon the very important or the most famous Bollywood stars, right? So we have the betting and fantasy sports apps, encouraging gambling and addiction instead of real economic productivity. On the other hand, we have Chinese startups, which are focusing upon global logistics and trade, building supply chain giant like Shein, we have DJI, we have Alibaba that dictate the global commerce. Next, we have reels and influencer economy. Everyone is, we are so habitual, and this has become part and parcel of almost all the Indians, right? These reels phenomena, right? Creating a culture of mindless entertainment instead of real knowledge or skills. Deep tech and infrastructure, investing in space technology, high-speed rail, renewable energy, massive scales. Now, see, again, these are the areas, these are the points of differences which are real, right? We have to consider these things. Now, what are the issues plaguing the Indian startups? The very first is that Indian startups are focusing upon shallow innovation and sectoral concentration. See, again, understand. There can be two types of technological progress. Let's say we already have a base technology, right? And some incremental progress is then made. So we are just adding new technology, bit of new technology. This is what we are witnessing in India, right? So we already have an idea and we are adding some technology to it, and then we say that we have a new idea for the startup. What Chinese firms are doing? Chinese firms are actually coming up with disruptive ideas. Take, for example, we have artificial intelligence, DeepSeek. Take, for example, electric vehicles. We have BYD. We have Li Auto, right? Take, for example, the battery storage manufacturing systems. So Chinese firms are working upon disruptive technology. Those technologies which have completely changed the whole market scenario, right? So that is the difference. We are focusing upon shallow innovation. And again, the concentration in India is on some specific sectors, be it the food delivery apps, or for example, we have the instant grocery. We are not focusing upon the other areas, for example, agri-tech or clean technology or biotech. That is the issue, heavily skewed towards certain sectors. Lack of focus on emerging technology. So we are not focusing upon the emerging technology. For example, we have machine learning, we have robotics, we have artificial intelligence. We are not focusing upon that. Chinese startup companies, they are coming up with new products. For example, as I just told you, DeepSeek, right? So they are making up new AI models, whereas India hasn't come up with a new AI model as of now. And government is actually thinking about that, but as of now, we have no indigenous AI model as such. Next aspect is funding crunch in deep tech, right? So see, as of now, there are more than 6,000 deep tech startups in China, which have already received a funding of more than 100 billion US dollars. Guys, this particular data is really important, right? And you can quote these data in your answers, very important. So in China, we have more than 6,000 deep tech startups. In India, we just have around 500. and that too are not getting the adequate funding, right? So that is what you need to understand, the deep tech dominance of China. More than 6,000 deep tech startups, funding of more than $100 billion, right? And in the US, it's just double. So in the US, the deep tech startups focusing upon the AI, robotics, they have already received a funding of more than 200 billion US dollars, right? Less than 500 risk-averse investors. What these investors feel is that these enterprises are not really productive, right? And they are bound to fail. So we are not actually investing adequately in these startups. NASSCOM, in a report of 2023, what it said was that year by year, we are witnessing a slowdown in the funding to these startups, deep tech startups, which are really crucial for the emerging economy, right? Limited global scale. The Indian startups are focusing upon the domestic market. We are not focusing upon scaling it to the entire world. We have some of the very important startups by China. Let's talk about the Alibaba, right? Now, again, those particular startups in China, they are focusing upon manufacturing technology. They are focusing upon export-oriented innovation. The kind of innovation what they're doing is, it is focused upon the export. That is a very important concern. Bloom Ventures, in a report of 2023, what it found was that the startups in the country, they are not catering to more than 90% of the population. Now you would say, why? Why they're just catering to the 90% of the population? Sorry, 10% of the population. They are not able to cater to the 90% of population is because the 90% of the population does not have the adequate disposable incomes. Only 10% of the population is having disposable incomes. And these startups are only focusing upon them. Only focusing upon the urban middle class, right? That is a very important concern. So these startups are not for all. They're just for specific sections of the society. Next aspect is weak intellectual property base, especially in the core technologies. What we are trying to say is that we have limited indigenous technological development. We are not developing technology to that extent to which the other firms around the world are developing. And even for those core technologies, we are heavily dependent upon the imports. Imports, especially from China, right? Be it the battery manufacturing, be it the other technologies, for example, let's say solar modules, right? Heavily dependent on the imports. Then there are gaps in the ecosystem. For example, there is absolute lack of R&D. What is the research and development spending in India? It's just around 0.6% of the GDP, very less. And for countries like China, it tunes to almost 2 to 3% of GDP, right? So there's a vast difference. Lack of incubators and accelerators. These incubators are really important. If you want to scale up a particular enterprise, a particular startup to that level, you need these incubators and accelerators, right? Mentors and advisors. And again, there is absolute policy fragmentation. What do we mean by that? Let's say the central government is coming up with a particular scheme for the startups enhancement. On the other hand, you have certain states in India, for example, let's say Telangana, which is also coming up with schemes for these startups. But there is policy fragmentation. There is inadequate implementation of schemes. That is where the policy fragmentation lies. Next, we have high compliance burden. See, for example, let's say there can be a mandatory compliance with respect to tax, with respect to intellectual property, with respect to other compliance, for example, environment norms. So there are a huge number. There's a plethora of compliance which have to be followed by these startups. And this ultimately increases the operational costs and ultimately the kind of the costs associated with the product. So ultimately it is the end consumer which gets affected. Also, we have the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business report. In 2020, it ranked India 63rd and it talked about the excessive bureaucratic hurdles, the red tapeism which is involved in India, right? That is what you have to understand. Next aspect we have is that of digital divide. See, most of these startups, they are based on technology, right? And the easiest way to access technology these days is smartphone. So according to a report by Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, 2024 report, what it says is that there are 880 million internet users in the country, almost 88 crores. But it gives a very important fact. It says that only 37% of the rural population has an access to the internet. The rest does not have access to the internet. Now we have almost 66 to 70% of the population residing in the rural areas. Out of that, let's say we have 37% only having access to the internet, rest are not having. So why we are not catering to that population? If they will have adequate access to the internet, they would also be in a position to use these apps, right? So that is a very important concern. Also, there are adoption barriers. There are different sectors. For example, let's say EdTech or let's say we have the e-health applications, or those applications which are actually made for the farmers. Now, if we'll not have adequate internet access in these areas, we'll not be able to use these apps, right? Then we have talent drain and cost arbitrage. India has a huge potential and we have really very good minds, right? So these minds are actually not having the proper resources. So ultimately what happens is that they go to different countries, be it US, be it some of the countries, any of the countries of European Union or Singapore or other countries. Now, that is what the brain drain is all about. Drain of talent, right? And we have different startups in US or we have European Union. Now, they are actually using the Indian talent. That is a very important concern. Not core innovation. Again, see, we have many of the startups which are primarily dealing with software as a service application. For example, we have Zoho, we have others, we have Freshworks. But there has been a research, and definitely these startups, Zoho or Freshworks, they are performing very good. But there is a research which says that many of the consumers, why they are using the products of Zoho and Freshworks is because they are offering the product at lower cost, not because the product is more innovative, right? So they do not have that much amount of innovation which the other products have. That is a very serious concern. Also, according to our data given by LinkedIn in the year 2023, it says almost 1.5 lakh Indians, they basically went to different places around the world in a period of 3 years before 2023, right? And these were the Indians which could have stayed in India and contributed domestically, but that was not done. Now again, when we talk about China's edge, now China is leader in specific areas, be it the electric vehicle. For example, we have companies like BYD, or we have Li Auto, or let's talk about the intellectual property, right? So they have a very strong intellectual property ecosystem. Next, they are working upon some of the very advanced AI models, right? And again, let's talk about DeepSeek. Now, what people are saying is that, see, first great achievement of China is that they have built their own indigenous platform. And they have had many platforms, but when we talk about DeepSeek, the importance of DeepSeek is that it has been made at a fraction of global costs. That is the amount of money which was required to make the whole setup of ChatGPT, of OpenAI's, right? That is very huge. But the amount of money which was required to make DeepSeek, that was very less. So what we see is it's very cost effective, right? Global giants, be it Alibaba, be it Shein, right? So they have emerged, be it Tencent, right? So they have massive scalability. And again, why they have attained the scalability? Initially, they were focused upon the domestic areas, but now they are global giants, primarily because their focus was upon the export-oriented innovation. That you must understand. Technology manufacturing, deep tech dominance. I already told this. Now, what should be the way forward with respect to Indian startup ecosystem? The very first is boost the deep tech and research and development. What we can do is we can basically come up with National Deep Tech Innovation Fund, right? And this particular fund can reduce the risks. It can provide the adequate funding to these startups which are focusing upon the deep tech areas, be it the robotics, be it the cloud computing, be it the quantum computing, right? Also, we have to expand the different schemes, be it the production linked incentives. We can expand these schemes, the PLI schemes, in different areas, be it robotics, be it semiconductors, right? So that is really needed. Also, again, to understand the demand of the market, what is really needed is there have to be a very robust institute-industry collaboration. There is a mismatch between the demand of the industry and the kind of the skills which are being provided in different schools and colleges and institutes. So we have to reduce this gap. And for that, what we have to do is there have to be more robust collaboration between the institute and the industry. Next, we have strengthened access to the capital. Very important. Here, the focus should be upon encouraging the early start venture capital funds. So see, again, we do have venture capital funds in India, right? But again, they are risk averse. They are not investing upon these deep tech startups because what they feel is that they are not going to reward us, right? So therefore, they don't basically invest. On the other hand, in China, what is happening is that there is a very heavy investments, especially in these deep tech startups. Because though they may be high risk areas, but they can also be highly rewarding. That you must understand. Simplify the angel tax rules. What we are trying to say is that if we simplify these angel tax rules, this would avoid the further litigation, right? So there is huge caseload of litigations with respect to these areas. So again, we have to simplify the rules. Next is domestic venture capital culture. So we should not only depend upon the outside sources, we should develop our own indigenous venture capital base. Next, we have to focus upon the intellectual property hubs. We are primarily dependent upon the technology, which is actually imported from different countries around the world. We are focusing upon indigenous technology, but again, what you need to understand is primarily we are dependent upon the import of technology. So it does not mean that we do not have the talent in the country. What it means is that we are not having adequate intellectual property registration system. So we have to strengthen, we have to fast track the intellectual property rights approval process in the country. We have to encourage the IPRs in public funded institutions. Why? Because if we encourage the IPRs in public funded institutions, then that particular technology, that particular intellectual property can be commercialized, can be given to a private player, right, on such terms as the institute thinks fit, right? So that is really important. IP management training is really needed, and we need to come up with a very robust workforce with respect to intellectual property. Next, we have globalization of Indian startups. We really cannot keep ourselves restricted to the domestic market. We have to expand ourselves beyond the borders. There have to be enhanced market access. Let's talk about the ASEAN countries or African countries, right? Or the Middle East. So over there's a huge market opportunity. We have to expand in those areas. Cross-border incubators need to be there. For example, we can have some of the very good incubators helping the Indian startups. So very good incubators in Singapore or Hong Kong helping the Indian startups. Then we have a role of Indian embassies. This is a very good point. So Indian embassies should basically link themselves to different venture capitals, or they should give information with respect to the kind of work which we are having in the country, right? So they can hold seminars or conferences. That is really important. Decentralize the ecosystem. Now, what we are trying to say is that we have to incentivize the startups to set up in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Very important. See, primarily these are the emerging areas, tier 2 and tier 3 cities, where you have a lot of population, which can be definitely a very good potential market for these startups. So we should focus upon these areas. And again, new sectors should be focused upon. We cannot just continue to focus upon these sectors like groceries or instant delivery. We have to focus upon agri-tech. We have to focus upon clean technology, right? That is really important. Bridge the digital divide. So there has to be the strengthened application or implementation of BharatNet, and 5G should be expanded in different areas. Really important. Digital entrepreneurship. So we have the Skill India mission, right? So we can also provide training with respect to digital entrepreneurship so that people have adequate skills with respect to using these technology, right? We have to create a robust workforce. That should be the objective. Startup curriculum in education. See, what is really needed is that the school children should also be aware with respect to what this startup ecosystem means and what is entrepreneurship, right? So this has to be incorporated in the curriculum framework. That is very important. And again, we should go with the mentorship programs. For example, those founders of successful startups, they can basically go, they can conduct seminars, right? They can participate in the conferences, they can be invited, and then they can guide those young bright minds. So that can be really helpful. Ease of doing business and compliance. What is really needed is that we should focus upon creating a single startup portal where all the formalities are done there itself. So let's say if I am a person coming up with a particular enterprise, I need not to go to 1,000 places. I should there itself fill all the formalities, right? And that should be a single window mechanism. That is really needed. Time-bound clearance windows. There have to be a process which has strict timelines that by this date, your formal approvals would be done, right? So this is really needed. So what we are trying to say is, see, again, if we are saying that Indian startup ecosystem is skewed towards low technology or just domestic areas, we are not saying that India's startup ecosystem is not vibrant. It is definitely very vibrant. But what we have to focus is that in order to compete with the kind of startups we are having in China or in fact in US, we have to focus upon technology. We have to focus upon research and development. And for that, adequate policy initiatives are also required from the government side, right? So it's not like only the private players are responsible for it, right? And again, everything works on demand. And as we had some of the founders saying that this is the demand of the Indian economy, and we are working in that direction. So the success of these startups, be it grocery delivery apps, or be it the instant delivery apps. So if they're successful, what it means is definitely the market needs it. But again, we have to switch to the deep tech. We have to switch to those areas which are really emerging in nature, right? So that is what you need to know with respect to this article. Let's have a mains practice question. India's startup ecosystem has emerged as the third largest in the world, but it is often criticized for focusing more on service-based models than on deep tech innovation. How can India shift its focus to build a sustainable and innovative startup ecosystem in line with the global trends? 15 marks, 250 words. Do write a particular answer in this question. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, the enriched content, do not forget to press the like button and let us know through the comments. Let's go to the next topic. So coming to the second topic of the day, this is with respect to World Health Day, what India needs. So on April 7th, we are celebrating the World Health Day. And this year, the theme is Healthy Beginnings, Hopeful Futures. Now again, what you need to understand is that this year we are emphasizing upon the critical role played by the maternal and newborn health in the overall health paradigm. So we have 3 articles which are there in the Hindu, and I have tried to comprehensively cover it. So we have the first article, which is written by the chairman of Apollo Hospitals, which focuses upon the preventive medicine. The second article is written by Joint Secretary to the Government of India, and this particular article talks about the water, sanitation and hygiene, and it mostly talks about the government's success in that particular area. Then we have the third article, which is written by a research scholar, and this highlights the gaps in the healthcare delivery system in the country and the way forward. Now, again, one more thing which I would like to add here is many times students come to us and they have been asking this question quite frequently, that how to actually extract the information from the newspaper, right? So in these 3 articles, there is no concept as such which is involved, but there is very good amount of information which is given, primarily with respect to the healthcare setup in the country. So what I have tried to done is, I have tried to extract the information, and that can be a learning for you, right? So you can also do in the same manner. That would definitely help you. Now this is a part of GS2, social sector and health. Now in the very first article, the author is trying to focus upon the preventive medicine. What the author is trying to say is that we more often focus upon the curative aspects of health. But what is really more important is giving adequate importance to the preventive aspect. That is really important. So what the author says is that there is a growing threat to India's economic aspirations, and it is primarily because of the non-communicable disease. So what are non-communicable diseases? For example, we have heart diseases, we have stroke, we have blood pressure, we have diabetes, right? So these are non-communicable diseases. Now, because of that, the whole economy, the whole Indian economy is suffering. Primarily because once a person suffers from a non-communicable disease, his health suffers, and ultimately that has a direct consequence on the overall economy. So what the author is saying is that because of these non-communicable diseases, the aspirations to have a $5 trillion economy, they are actually under darkness, right? Next aspect is, what you need to understand is, very important data is given in the article that NCDs, non-communicable diseases, are the leading cause of death in the country. Almost 2/3 of the total deaths in the country, more than 66% of the total deaths in the country, they are attributed to the non-communicable diseases. Also, we have almost 5 to 6 million Indians which die annually because of these non-communicable diseases, right? Next aspect which the author is trying to talk about is the early onset and impact on working population. So the author is trying to say is that these non-communicable diseases are now affecting the younger populations more. So this is a very serious threat to the demographic dividend, right? So this is a very serious threat to the demographic dividend, and almost 22% of Indians over the age of 30, they are at risk of dying before the age of 70 because of the non-communicable disease. Next aspect is that of economic toll of non-communicable disease. So according to the author, because of these non-communicable disease, there is a loss to the overall Indian economy to the tune of 5 to 10% of India's GDP. Also, we have had a joint study by the World Economic Forum and the Harvard University, which actually came up with the conclusion that from the period 2012 till 2030, India would suffer to the tune of almost 3.5 to 4 trillion US dollars because of these non-communicable diseases. Now again, what the author is trying to focus upon is the preventable nature of these non-communicable disease. That is, these non-communicable disease can be easily prevented if we focus upon certain aspects of health, right? 80% of the premature heart diseases, strokes and diabetes can be prevented. What are the risk factors which are involved with respect to these non-communicable disease? So the very important is sedentary lifestyles, unhealthy diet, lesser intake of, let's say, the millets, and more intake of these cereals, right, or fats, or high sugar or salt content foods, then tobacco or alcohol use, or it can be because of the genetic disposition, or it can be because of the pollution, right? So pollution is also one of the very important causes of the lung disease, and ultimately people suffer from non-communicable diseases, serious non-communicable diseases. Then we have alarming lifestyle indicators. So according to the author, almost 20 to 23% of the Indian adults, they are suffering from overweight and obesity, right? Then again, pollution is one of the very important causes of the chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, COPD, or lung cancer or heart disease. So pollution is a very important cause of NCDs. Then we have the need for health screening. Now, why these health screening are important is because that they help us to detect a particular disease early, right? So that we can have adequate interventions. That is really important. And this would ultimately save lives. And again, if a person has having a genetic history, what is really important is to have these early screening before the age of 40 or even earlier. Role of technology in prevention. See, according to the author, more than 750 million Indians have smartphones, right? So it tunes to almost 75 crores. Now, this can be utilized, this can be leveraged, because we are having a lot of these, applications which are based on AI or other technologies, right? Which can basically detect a particular disease or can help a person know that whether that person is more prone to a particular disease or not, right? So we are having wearables and health trackers which give adequate and real-time information to that particular person. And AI can definitely be very helpful with respect to preventive health, right? So we have the development of diagnostic techniques, right? Or we have the predictive analysis because on the basis of artificial intelligence. So that can be really utilized. Next aspect is that of towards a preventive mindset. What the author is trying to say is we need to have this mindset where we focus upon preventing a disease and not waiting for the disease to happen, right? That is really needed. And for that, a nationwide culture has to develop. According to the author, there have to be regular checkups and healthy living. And again, these workplaces, different workplaces should focus upon the wellness programs, annual health checkups that can be done on healthcare providers, be it the doctors, be it the primary health centers at the grassroots level. They should focus upon the preventive aspects of the healthcare. Next, the government initiatives and public policy. So we already have the national program for the prevention and control of NCDs, right? So this is a right step. And again, we also are focusing upon the health and wellness centers, which are also in one way or the other preventing these diseases, focusing upon the preventive healthcare. What are the policy suggestions given by the author? That we should focus upon urban planning. That is, we should focus upon more green spaces in the urban areas so that we can have more cleaner air, right? And the risk of these disease is reduced. Also, nutrition education should become a part of the curriculum. People should know that which food is better with respect to the nutritional amount, right? Nutrition it carries. That is really important. Now, coming to the second article, as I told you, that this article is written by Joint Secretary to the Government of India. So it majorly highlights the achievements of the government. And see, again, while writing an answer, this also becomes important, right? So what the author says is that India's sanitation and water revolution, it's a public health milestone. So on this particular World Health Day, India's progress in sanitation and water access is something which has to be recognized. And this is nothing but a foundation to the public health ecosystem in the country. Now, the author primarily focuses upon two very important initiatives. Now, the very first program on which the author is focusing is the Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin. Now, what the author says is that we started with this particular program way back in the year 2014. And by 2019, India became open defecation free. So this is really a milestone which India has achieved. Also, we had Sustainable Development Goal 6.2, which talks about the adequate and equitable sanitation and hygiene for people by the year 2030. And India has achieved this milestone 11 years ahead of the target, according to the author. Also, according to the World Health Organization in its report of 2019, because of Swachh Bharat Mission, India actually averted over 3 lakh diarrheal deaths. So because of good sanitation practices on the basis of Swachh Bharat Mission, we averted 3 lakh diarrheal deaths. Next, we have the data by UNICEF of 2017, which says that 93% of the women in the rural areas, they actually feel safer because of the construction of toilets. Also, what it says is that there is an annual saving of almost 50,000 rupees in ODF families. So previously, families used to spend a lot of money because of the ill health, but now they're having these savings because they constructed toilet, and now they're not bearing that burden of the cost, health cost. Next data is with respect to the Gates Foundation. So in the year 2017, what the Gates Foundation said, that in the non-ODF areas, non-open defecation free areas, the instances of child wasting were 58% higher in comparison to the ODF areas. Coming to the Nature Journal, right? So in the year 2024, it said that because of the Swachh Bharat Mission, Grameen, it has prevented almost 60 to 70,000 child deaths in the country because of the sanitation, good sanitation practices. Also, the groundwater contamination has reduced in the ODF areas to the tune of 12.7 times, right? So this is what you need to understand. Now, the next mission which the author is focusing upon is Jal Jeevan Mission. Now, what are the key objectives? So this particular mission, which was launched in the year 2019, the objective is to provide functional household tap water connections in the rural households. So according to the author, almost more than 80% of the rural households have already been covered under this particular mission. What are the health and economic benefits? So according to the Michael Kremer study, this particular mission has led to 30% reduction in the infant deaths because now they are having access to clean water in their households, right? Also, according to the World Health Organization, this particular mission would lead to the reduction of almost 4 lakh diarrheal deaths. We have had also a particular study by the SBI. It said that because of this particular scheme, there would be the saving of almost 5.5 crore hours saved daily, right? Why? Because initially women had to go, primarily the women had to go to far off places to fetch the water, but now they're already having the tap water connections, right? So this time can be utilized for more productive avenues, right? So this is leading the increased participation of women in economic livelihood opportunities. That is what you need to understand. Also, we have the Sujal and Swachh Gaon campaign. This particular campaign, it integrates the water sanitation hygiene at the village level and it reinforces the preventive aspect of the healthcare, right? And ultimately, once you'll have this particular villages being certified as Swachh Sujal, what it means is that they are completely having the water sanitation and hygiene, right? And this would indirectly benefit the overall health of the people, right? And ultimately it would have the reduced out-of-pocket expenditure. Now, women are at the forefront in all of these schemes. More than 25 lakh women, they are trained and they have become, for example, water testers, right? So we have a particular component in the Jal Jeevan Mission where water quality has to be tested. So many women have been trained to become as water testers, right? Women-led self-help groups, they're managing different enterprises. For example, we have sanitation assets. They're looking after these assets. Also, they're looking after the recycling units. We have many of these women-led sanitary napkin manufacturing units, right? So this is a very important point. Role transformation, that is from earlier as beneficiaries, now they're playing a role as change makers. They are active stakeholders in this whole healthcare paradigm. What is the global relevance and sustainability? See, India's tech-driven models, for example, we are having Jal Jeevan Mission or Swachh Bharat Mission. They are providing the real-time information. This can be a learning for different countries around the world. So according to the author, we have different countries, for example, Africa. They can basically learn from India's achievements. For example, we have the Govardhan biogas, which is converting the waste to wealth, right? Also, we have plastic waste management. Now, these models are replicable globally, especially in the global south. Also, according to the author, every 1 rupee invested in water, sanitation and hygiene returns manifold benefits, right? So this is a very important aspect. We have to adequately focus upon the water, sanitation and hygiene so that we can have its positive effect in different other areas. What is the way forward? So lessons from India, right? So just focus upon the word from India. So we can have different countries learning from India. This is what the author is saying. Recognize sanitation and clean water. This is the most important aspect of public health. This has to be recognized. And this is to serve as the first line defense. Also, what the author is trying to emphasize is that there has to be, in all these schemes, one thing which was very important was the community ownership. Community is at the center. So this is really important. There has to be adequate participation of the community and inter-ministerial convergence. It's not like only a single ministry is spearheading the mission. We have the collaboration and coordination among different ministries. So this is what is needed. Coming to the third article. So we have this particular article written by this research scholar. It says that we have this particular World Health Day with the focus healthy beginnings and hopeful futures. And the focus is upon the maternal and newborn health. India, which is having a population of more than 1.4 billion, faces immense challenges and opportunities also. Healthcare equity and accessibility has to be at the forefront if we want to achieve the aspirations of national development. Now, again, what the author is trying to put forward is that India has come up with some of the very important health initiatives. For example, we have had the Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. Now, this particular mission focuses upon covers more than 50 crore individuals, provide them the health cover, right? So this is very important. Also, we have had the institutionalization of the health and wellness centers. Now, these health and wellness centers are primarily important for the preventive healthcare delivery, right? So this is what you need to understand. What are the challenges which the healthcare setup is facing, the systemic challenges? First, we have staff shortages, be it the doctors, be it the nursing staff, then inadequate diagnostic facilities. So we have basically different tiers in the healthcare setups, be it the district hospitals, then we have the tertiary aspects. At the base, we have the primary health centers, the sub-centers. Now, we do not have the adequate human resource on one side, and we do not have the adequate diagnostic tools or equipments. That is one of the issues. Irregular supplies, for example, of medicines. This is a very crucial issue. Rural healthcare infrastructure disparity. So what the author is trying to say is, though the rural areas, they contribute to almost 70% of the total population, but only 30 to 40% of the healthcare infrastructure is there in the rural areas. That is, we are not focusing adequately upon the rural areas. Even when we are having these primary health centers or the sub-centers, they do not have the adequate capacity to deal with the population which is there in the rural areas. And ultimately what happens is that these people who are living in the rural areas, they have to travel long distances, right? And it does two things. It is a drain on their resource, what we call as out-of-pocket expenditure. And second, it also, if the person is suffering from communicable disease, then it can also affect the other population, right? The other people. Need for greater investments. So what we need to focus upon is tier 1 and tier 2 cities. We are not focusing upon those areas. And again, we have to incentivize the medical professionals. We have to incentivize by giving them a good pay. If we want to retain them in the rural areas, or in fact, say even urban areas. But what we are seeing now is that after they complete their medicine, after they complete their MBBS, they fly to different countries, primarily because they are not having those incentives in the country itself. So we need to give them adequate incentives. Talking about the disease burden in India, so what it says is that what the author is trying to say is that India is actually having dual burden of disease. So almost we have the non-communicable disease whose share is more than 65%. We already studied in the very first article. And the causes are sedentary lifestyle, poor diets. Our diets are not having the adequate mix of millets or nutrients or micronutrients, vitamins. And there is increased usage of tobacco or alcohol, or it can be because of the genetic predisposition, right? Or it can be because of the increased pollution in the environment. So these are the reasons. Now, what are the key statistics? So according to the International Diabetes Federation, we have almost more than 10 crore people in the country suffering from diabetes, right? This is a very serious concern. And we have the air pollution, which is causing the death of almost 16 lakh people. Now, this is by the Lancet in the year 2019. Also, we have the aspect of malnutrition. Just before a few days, I covered malnutrition, right? Quite extensively. Now, because of the malnutrition, what is happening is people are more prone to disease because they're not having adequate capacity to fight. They're not having the adequate immune system because they're not having proper diet, right? So that is one of the primary reasons for disease. So according to the National Family Health Survey data of 5th, what it says is that we have almost 35% children under the age of 5 which are stunted, low height for age, right? And 57% of the women in the age group of 19 to 49 years, they are actually anemic. So this is a very serious concern. What are the government interventions? So we have had the Poshan Abhiyan, a very comprehensive aspect focusing upon the overall nutritional enhancement of the children, right? Then we have the Integrated Child Development Scheme, focuses upon the preschool education, or let's say the nutritional aspect, right? Or immunization. So this is a very important point. Now, what is really required is better data monitoring, because we are not having data. See, again, this is a survey, National Family Health Survey. So these surveys are carried out. We are not having real-time information. That is a loophole. And if we do not have adequate data with us, definitely we will not be able to come up with right policy initiatives. Community engagement is really needed at the grassroots, right? Multi-sectoral coordination. So again, see, we need different ministries to converge. We cannot just imagine that Ministry of Health would do all on its own, right? So we need different ministries. Health financing, so the budget of 2025-26. So just almost 2% of the budget went to the health aspect. Can you just imagine? Just 2% of the budget is going to health aspect, and for defense, definitely the amount is quite high. So what it leads to is, if we do not have adequate public spending upon health, it leads to higher out-of-pocket expenditure. What is out-of-pocket expenditure? The amount which is borne by the individual itself, right? So whatever the amount is being borne by the individual on his or her own basis, that is out-of-pocket expenditure. According to the data, because of the health burden, because of the health costs, what happened is that almost 5 crore people, 5.5 crore people, they fall into the poverty trap, because they do not have adequate funds and they spent whatever they have in the health costs. So ultimately, they are in that poverty trap. What is the urgent need? The most important aspect is to focus upon the preventive healthcare. As the first article was also focusing upon, we need to focus upon the screenings, that is early detection, and we need to basically include these aspects in the school health programs, nutritional aspects, right? Public campaigns, Eat Right campaign, for example, reduced intake of salt and sugar, reduced intake of fat, right? So this is really needed. Now, what have been the digital initiatives? So we have been focusing upon the Ayushman Bharat digital mission, or for example, let's say eSanjeevani, right? So eSanjeevani is a teleconsultation portal. More than 10 crore people have already registered through eSanjeevani, and this proved its worth during the COVID times, right? What are the challenges? See, what we need to understand is that in the rural areas, only 37% of the people have internet access. So they'll not be able to access the benefits of these initiatives. There is low digital literacy, right? And there are other risks as well. For example, cyber security risks. See, the health data of any individual, it's a very private information, right? And if there is no guarantee with the people that the data would be secure, definitely they would not be inclined to share the data. So there are issues with respect to data protection also. And we do not have a robust data protection mechanism as of now, right? What is a way forward? We have to invest heavily in the rural digital infrastructure. That is really needed. And we also studied in the very first article also that there is a need to expand BharatNet or 5G in these areas, right? Frontline worker training should be there. These frontline workers in the health sector, they need to be adequately trained, be it the ASHA workers or be it the auxiliary nurse midwife or be it the Anganwadi workers. They need to be given proper training. And again, if you want to retain them, if you want to incentivize them to work better, you'll have to provide them increased payouts, right? That is really important. Robust data privacy legislation is needed. We need to leverage new technologies, for example, artificial intelligence. So we have predictive analysis, right? A particular machine can predict whether the person is more prone to a particular disease or not. So we should incorporate these technologies. Wearables and remote monitoring is needed. Also, there is one aspect which has been focused upon in this article. It says about mental health and climate change. So we have almost 14% of the population in the country which suffers from mental disorders, according to Nimhan's report of 2023. And again, this is a very serious concern because of the increase in the suicide rates in the country, right? More and more youngsters are committing suicides, right? Which we also covered in one of the analysts. So again, what we should focus upon is reducing the anxiety, reducing the burden on the minds, right? We have young people who are actually in their preparation mode. Let's say they're preparing for exams, right? And they are under so much of pressure. So we should basically focus upon rejuvenating or enhancing the mental health of these students and youngsters, right? Now, what are the notable efforts? So we have Telemanas helpline. You must have seen in the Hindu. So we have numbers. If in distress, you can call it this number. So that is really helpful. If a person is suffering from anxiety or depression, definitely that person should seek someone help, right? And therefore, that would be really good. National Action Plan on Climate Change and Human Health. So we are integrating the ill effects of climate change and the human health. So we are already witnessing the heat waves, right? Increasing instances of heat waves or droughts or other things. So that must be integrated into the overall health aspect. So again, what these three articles are emphasizing upon, they're telling about the status of India's healthcare system and what can be the way forward in order to have a robust ecosystem. So in the very first article, they're focusing upon the preventive medicines, right? We need to focus more upon the preventive rather than on the curative aspect. In the second article, the author is trying to focus upon the WASH, that is water, sanitation and hygiene. And in the third article, again, it is talking about the increased burden of NCDs and the loopholes which are there in the public healthcare setup, right? And what can be the way forward. So let's have a mains practice question. India's healthcare system has made significant strides through the flagship initiatives such as Ayushman Bharat, the expansion of health and wellness centers, and digital health missions. However, it continues to grapple with various challenges. In this context, critically examine the present status of India's healthcare system and suggest interventions to build a robust, inclusive, and resilient healthcare framework. 15 marks, 250 words. Do write a particular answer on this question. So coming to the simplified section, we have the first topic which talks about judicial transparency. So what the article says is only 12% of the judges in the high courts across the country have declared their assets. Only 12%. Now this topic becomes really important, especially after the events which unfolded after a fire erupted at Justice Yashwant Verma's house. Now, what was allegedly found was huge hoards of burnt currency notes. Now, again, it is in that light that we had a particular meeting of the Supreme Court, full court meeting, where all the 33 judges of the Supreme Court said that they are going to declare their assets publicly. Second aspect which we'll discuss in today's article is the 1997 Code of Ethics. What it said was the restatement of values of judicial life. So that can be really important for your mains, right? So let's see. 769 judges, among the 769 judges currently serving in the 25 high courts of India, only 95, that is just around 12.35, have chosen to disclose their assets and liabilities, according to the official websites. The alleged discovery of partially burnt currency notes at the residence of High Court Judge Yashwant Verma has intensified the discussions about the transparency within the judiciary, which is really important, right? So we expect the member of parliaments or the executive to be transparent. So the same applies to the judiciary as well, right? Including the broader issue of asset disclosure among judges. All the 33 serving Supreme Court judges agreed in a full court meeting on April 1st to make their assets declaration public on the official top court website. Currently, among the 6 high courts where the judges have declared their assets, the Kerala High Court leads with 41 out of 44 judges having completed their disclosures, accounting for almost 93.14%, 18%. The Himachal Pradesh High Court follows closely with around 11 out of 12 judges, that is 91.66%, having done the same. So you can see we have Chhattisgarh, right? Number of judges who declared their assets as on April 5th, current strength of judges. So in Chhattisgarh, only one judge has declared out of 16 judges. Himachal Pradesh, 11 out of 12. Madras, 5 out of 65. Punjab and Haryana, 30 out of 53. Delhi, 7 out of 38. Kerala, 41 out of 44. Now the source is with respect to respective high courts. The Delhi High Court has 7 of its 38 judges declaring their assets, a sharp fall from 2018 when 29 out of 35 declared their assets. The Delhi High Court's archives list disclosures from 64 former judges who are either retired, transferred or elevated to the Supreme Court. Currently, out of 33 serving judges, 30, including the Chief Justice of India, Sanjeev Khanna, have submitted their asset declaration as displayed on the official websites. A recent full court meeting on April 1st marked a significant shift. All the 33 Supreme Court judges agreed to make their assets public. In August 2023, a parliamentary standing committee submitted a report titled Judicial Processes and the Reformed, and this pushed for legislative changes. It called upon the government to mandate the annual property declarations for all the judges of the High Courts and the Supreme Court. What the report said verbatim was that, and very important, the Supreme Court has gone to the extent of holding that public has a right to know the assets of those standing for the elections as MPs or MLAs. So Supreme Court, you have said to us that those who are standing or contesting the elections for the MPs or MLAs, please declare assets. But that thing also applies to you also, right? When so, it belies logic that judges don't need to disclose their assets and liabilities. Anybody holding public office and drawing a salary from the exchequer should mandatorily furnish the annual returns of their property, the committee has said. Very important lines, right? You can also cite in your answers. Now, this is important. 1997 Code of Ethics Code. Supreme Court judges to publicly declare their assets, recalling the 1997 Ethics Code, which mentioned this particular idea. So this idea is not something which has just come. It is based on the 1997 Ethics Code. A code of ethics that the judiciary adopted 3 decades ago continues to inform the conversations on how judges should conduct themselves while performing their official duties. That is what you need to understand. Restatement of values of judicial life. That was the title of this particular code. Through the code, the Supreme Court attempted to create a framework for the institutional accountability on multiple issues. It included declaration of judges' assets and investments to the Chief Justice of India and laying the groundwork for an in-house procedure to conduct inquiries against judges who allegedly transgressed or infringed or broke these values and faced allegations of misbehavior or corruption. So this particular restatement of values, what it said was that you have to mandatorily submit your assets, whatever assets you have, to the Chief Justice of India. And it also provided for the in-house inquiry if there are allegations of corruption or misbehavior. Adopting the restatement of values of judicial life was the most important outcome of the full court meeting. It gave every future measure for ensuring judicial accountability, including those adopted in the same meeting, ground to stand on. On the same day, the full court resolved to develop the in-house procedure to take the action against the judges who do not follow the universally accepted values of judicial life, including those indicated in the code. A 5-member committee developed the procedure in October of the same year, and it was formally adopted in the year 1999. Following another full court meeting in 2009, the judges decided to declare their assets publicly purely on voluntary basis. See, again the voluntary basis came. Then in 2018, a constitution bench held that the assets and liabilities of the judges are not personal information for the purpose of RTI inquiries. Very, very important. So the case, one of the very important case was CPIO, Central Public Information Officer, Supreme Court versus Subhash Chandra Agarwal. Right. In this particular case, Supreme Court said in the year 2019 that the office of the Chief Justice of India as a part of Supreme Court is a public authority under the provisions of right to information, right? So they cannot say that we are not going to give you the information. They have to give the information. Though their process can be different, but they have to give the information. That is what you need to understand. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the projects launched in Sri Lanka. So we have Prime Minister Modi launching 2 very important projects in Sri Lanka. The very first is a railway line and the second is the advanced signaling system. Also, Sri Lankan government has released 14 Indian fishermen, right? So let's go through this. Prime Minister Narendra Modi traveled to Anuradhapura in the north-central Sri Lanka and launched 2 Indian-assisted railway projects. Sri Lankan government released 14 Indian fishermen a day after Prime Minister Modi called for a more humane approach with respect to these fishermen. Modi visited the Jaya Shri Mahabodhi temple and paid his respects at the revered Buddhist shrine. After that, the 2 leaders inaugurated the 128-kilometer Maho-Omanthai railway line, refurbished with Indian assistance of almost 91.27 billion US dollars, followed by the launch of construction of advanced signaling system from Maho to Anuradhapura. The signaling system has been built with Indian grant assistance of almost 14.89 million US dollars. This represents a significant milestone in strengthening the north-south rail connectivity in Sri Lanka. This would facilitate fast and efficient movement of both passenger and freight traffic across the country. See, again, India has been, and the reason, the rationale which basically makes India to help these countries around its neighbors is the Gujarat Doctrine, right? And we are actually following it on the basis of non-reciprocity, right? Gujarat Doctrine is very important. So again, India has been contributing a lot with respect to the infrastructure development in its neighboring countries. Before leaving for India, Modi said his visit to Sri Lanka has reaffirmed the deep cultural, spiritual and civilizational ties. Be it in Colombo or Anuradhapura, this visit has reaffirmed the deep cultural, spiritual, civilizational ties between our 2 nations. Now here is some validated information which I really wanted to provide. What is this Jaya Shri Mahabodhi tree? This Bo tree is believed to have grown from the branch of a tree in Bodh Gaya in present-day Bihar, under which Gautam Buddha attained enlightenment. You can just have a look. So this is the Mahabodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, Bihar, right? Under which it is believed that Gautam Buddha attained enlightenment. The branch was carried to Sri Lanka by Sanghamitta or Sanghamitra. You can use any of these names. The Mauryan king Ashoka's daughter and Buddhist nun. Her arrival in Sri Lanka with the tree is still celebrated as Uduvapa Poya, an annual festival observed on a full moon night in December. This is very, very important. Maybe a question can be asked in the prelims. Do remember. So the festival is known as Uduvapa Poya. The tree, along with the other Buddhist shrines in the ancient city of Anuradhapura, is a major pilgrimage center for Buddhists. Anuradhapura is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Anuradhapura, a Ceylonese political and religious capital that flourished for 1,300 years, was abandoned after an invasion in 993 CE. Hidden away in the dense jungle for many years, the splendid site with its palaces, monasteries and monuments is now accessible once again, the UNESCO website says. The invasion in 993 CE was by the Chola Empire of the South India. Why did Sanghamitra travel to Sri Lanka? Important. On the invitation of the king and the suggestion of her brother Mahendra or Mahinda. During the reign of Ashoka, the third Buddhist council is believed to have met, where it was decided to send missionaries to different regions to propagate Buddhism. Missions left for Gandhara, Kashmir, South Indian, some Greek kingdoms and Sri Lanka. The very successful mission to Sri Lanka was led by Prince Mahendra or Mahinda, Ashoka's son. Mahinda met King Devanampiya Tissa, whose capital was Anuradhapura, and converted him to Buddhism. After a number of royal ladies also wished to join Buddhist monastic order, Mahinda sent for his sister Sanghamita to come and initiate them. Right? So this is the chronology which you should know. Both Mahinda and Sanghamita lived in Anuradhapura for the rest of their lives. How has the Jaya Sri Mahabodhi tree survived for long? Through dedicated care and the fact that the peepal tree can regrow from its roots and seeds. The tree has not been immune to attacks. In 1929, a man tried to chop it off in an act of vandalism. While in 1985, LTT, Liberation Tigers of Tamil Nadu, militants went on a rampage in Anuradhapura, gunning down almost 146 people in the vicinity of the tree. And what about the Mahabodhi tree in Gaya? While the original tree under which the Lord Buddha meditated was destroyed in some legends by one of Ashoka's wives, Trishya Rakshita, the existing peepal tree at the site is believed to have descended from the germplasm, that is the genetic material of that original tree. This is what you need to understand, the chronology. It can be important for the prelims. Let's go to the next article. Coming to the next article, this is with respect to the Inter-Parliamentary Union. So we have the Speaker of the Lok Sabha attending a meeting of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, and he has talked about the socialistic aspect of the governance in India. The inclusive and welfarist nature of the Constitution of India integrates marginalized and backward sections of society into the mainstream of progress. This is what has been said by Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla. He was giving his keynote address at the 150th Assembly of the Inter-Parliamentary Union at Tashkent, Uzbekistan. So this makes this particular body very important. He said bills including the Rights of Persons with Disabilities 2016, Transgender Persons Act of 2019 and Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam of 2023 safeguard the interests of all sections. He referred to new labor laws and codes which were passed for the welfare and social security of the workers in unorganized sectors. And again, what he said was that India was playing a leading role in the world in innovation, be it artificial intelligence, startups, space, defense technology, information technology, financial technology, and pharmaceuticals. Now, what is Inter-Parliamentary Union? Very important for democracy, for everyone. Now, please understand, this is not a particular organization which is associated with the United Nations. Just remember this. And it predates even to the First World War, right? So it primarily came into being in 1889. Remember, it predates even the First World War. The IPU is a global organization for national parliament. What began in 1889, a small group of parliamentarians dedicated to promoting peace through parliamentary diplomacy and dialogue, has since grown into a truly global organization with almost 181 members and 15 associate members. The IPU facilitates parliamentary diplomacy and empowers parliaments and parliamentarians to promote peace, democracy, sustainable development around the world. Slogan: for democracy, for everyone. And again, they want a world where every voice counts, where democracy and parliaments are at the service of the people. Mission: the IPU is the global organization of the national parliaments. We promote democratic governance, institutions, and values, working with the parliaments and parliamentarians to articulate and respond to the needs and aspirations of the people. See, the gist is, first, it is not a part of the United Nations. Second, what you need to understand is the overall objective is to promote democracy through parliamentary means. So it is basically an organization which integrates different parliaments around the world, be it unicameral or bicameral. That is what you need to understand. The headquarters of IPU are in Geneva, Switzerland. And again, they also have their offices in New York, United States, and Vienna, Austria. But what you need to understand is that it is an organization which is catering to the interests of different parliaments around the world. And it is basically funded by different parliaments around the world, voluntary contributions. That is what you need to know. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the University Grants Commission's issuance of Equivalence Certificate. The gist of the article is that you have many students pursuing their education from foreign institutes or their campuses around the world. Now, when they come back for the higher education, for pursuing higher education, or for joining a particular employment, they need to have this equivalence certificate, right? So we have the UGC coming up with these guidelines and saying that now UGC is going to issue these equivalence certificate to streamline the process. That is the overall gist. The University Grants Commission's Regulation of 2025 have basically released these particular rules. These regulations specify the procedure for obtaining the equivalence certificates, which are documents certifying that a qualification obtained in educational institution abroad, like a degree or diploma, is equivalent to a comparable qualification in India. The UGC made draft of these rules in 23. What do these rules apply to? With some exceptions, the equivalence certificate will be valid for all academic institutions under the UGC, for higher education and research, and for employment in cases. Now, disciplines like medicines, this is very important. Disciplines like medicines, pharmacy, nursing, law, architecture, and other qualifications regulated by the norms of respective statutory councils will not be covered under these regulations. That is what you need to understand. So if you already have a statutory council regulating these areas, for example, we have AICTE, right, All India Council for Technical Education. Those subjects which are regulated by AICTE would not be counted and they would not be given the equivalence certificate. They will, however, be applicable for qualifications obtained via distance or online learning modes. Again, equivalence certificates will not be required for qualifications obtained from the foreign institutions that have collaboration with Indian institutions under the UGC guidelines. Next, what are the conditions for granting equivalence? First is if it was awarded by a foreign institution that is recognized under the law in its home country. The entry-level requirements like the minimum credit requirements or requirements of a thesis or internship for admission to program that are similar to program of that sort offered in India. If the student has pursued the program as per the norms and standards specified by the foreign institution. So you need not to memorize this, but just understand what is equivalence certificate. Qualifications obtained from offshore campuses of foreign institutes can also be granted equivalence certificate, provided that the academic program complies with the requirements in the country where the campus is located and in the country of origin of that institute. The regulations will apply to school qualifications also. In case if they want to apply for admission to an undergraduate program in India, for this the student needs to have completed at least 12 years of school education. How has equivalence been determined so far? So instead of the UGC, just understand this, at the moment the Association of Indian Universities, now we have this particular body, issues the equivalence certificates. The AIU is a registered society with several universities, including public and private, as its members. It also issues equivalence certificates for students who completed the school examinations from foreign boards. AIU's system will be replaced by the UGC. So we'll have a more streamlined pattern now. Why have the regulations been issued? In tune with the thrust of National Education Policy 2020 on the internationalization of higher education, and it would also provide clarity and consistency in the recognition process. The aim is to offer students and institutions a structured, transparent, and a fair system. He said, the chairman of the UGC, that regulations are intended to formalize and streamline the qualifications recognition process under a statutory framework designed to enhance the transparency, consistency, and accessibility in recognizing the foreign qualifications by laying down clear, publicly notified criteria. Many students return with the international qualifications to seamlessly integrate into India's higher education system or workforce. Such students need a structured procedure to evaluate the foreign credentials without unpredictable delays and procedural ambiguity. That is what I told you in the beginning. That is the overall objective of these issuance certificates. But they are not applicable to those courses for which we already have statutory councils. For example, AICT. That is what you need to understand. Let's go to the last article of the day. Coming to the last topic of the day, this is with respect to the new Pamban bridge. So again, there can be probable question in the prelims with respect to this. So we have the Prime Minister who has inaugurated the Pamban railway bridge, which connects the Rameswaram island of the Tamil Nadu coast with Ramanathapuram on the mainland. Constructed by the Rail Vikas Nigam Limited at the cost of 531 crores, the 2.08 kilometers bridge over the Palk Strait features 72.5 meter vertical lift span that can be raised to a height of 17 meters. The Prime Minister described this particular bridge as engineering wonder that brought together technology and tradition. The new structure, which has replaced the now defunct British era old Pamban railway bridge, is expected to enhance the connectivity while benefiting the trade and tourism in Tamil Nadu. So we have this new particular bridge, right, which can rise to almost 17 meters. Right, and we have this particular old bridge, British era bridge. With the Palk Strait being a highly corrosive environment, the bridge has been constructed with the stainless steel reinforcement and features high-grade protective paint. This is what you need to know with respect to this particular bridge. Now we have these infographic. You can just have a look. So we have the infographic provided by the PIB. It talks about the objective, location, year of sanction, anticipated cost, and other things. Now this is really important. So we have Palk Strait over here, right, between India and Sri Lanka. It is an inlet of the Bay of Bengal between the southeastern India and northern Sri Lanka. You can just see. So we have Gulf of Mannar here, we have Palk Strait here, and this we have the Palk Bay, right, and then we have Bay of Bengal. It is bounded on the south by the Pamban Island. So if you can just look at this particular map, we have the Pamban Island over here, right? Pamban Island, on which we have this present bridge. Adams Bridge, the Gulf of Mannar and Mannar Islands. The southwestern portion of the strait is called Palk Bay. So we have Palk Bay over here. The strait is named after Robert Palk, who was the governor of Madras Presidency in the British times. The strait is 40 to 85 miles wide, 85 miles long, and less than 330 feet. It receives several rivers, and we have the very important Vegai River, which falls in this and contains many islands on the Sri Lankan side. The port of Jaffna. So if you can just have a look over there in the map. So we have Jaffna over here, the port of Jaffna. The commercial center of the northern Sri Lanka lies on this particular strait. The shoals and the numerous islands long have limited transit through the strait to smaller vehicles. So this is very important. Maybe a question with respect to geography can be formed with respect to Palk Strait. Just remember, we have Gulf of Mannar, we have Palk Bay, we have Bay of Bengal, we have these islands, right? We have Pamban, we have Rameswaram. So just remember, and we have then Jaffna over here. And this is what the Palk Strait, which connects the Bay of Bengal with that of the Gulf of Mannar, right? So that's all for today. I hope you really enjoyed the session. All the very best, and thank you.